So I believe the audio is working. We'll be starting in a second. Good afternoon, everyone. Good morning to those of you that are not on the East Coast. Thank you so much for joining us all today. We're going to be starting in a second. And thank you all for introducing yourselves in the chat. It's a tremendous group. All right, so I think we can get started. I'm Jody Grant. I'm the Executive Director of the Afterschool Alliance. I'm coming to you live from Capitol Hill. And I'm really excited because we're here to discuss the new law, the American Rescue Plan, that has created an unprecedented opportunity for our field and for after school. And I'm really thrilled that joining us today are our Senior Vice President of Policy, our policy guru, Eric Peterson, and Tiffany Colley-Bailey, the CEO of Girls Inc. of Atlanta, who can tell us in practice how some of this is operating. And their full bios are going to be in the chat. The American Rescue Plan is really this tremendous opportunity for those of us in the after-school summer learning field to do something extraordinary for our kids. So what we're going to do on this webinar is give you a quick overview of the rescue plan and the funds that we are hoping that all of you can tap into to serve our children and our youth, how to make the case to the decision makers, which are your local education agencies and your state education agencies, that they should use these dollars for partnerships with community, faith-based, and other community organizations. Tools and resources that we have prepared to help all of you do what you do best. Perspectives from Tiffany, a provider, on exactly how to get into these funds for your children, and of course, time for all of your questions. And those that we don't answer live, we will answer in the chat room, or we will get to you after the video. And this presentation is being taped, so you will get a copy of the tape once it is ready so that you can share it with others. So this American Rescue Plan is the biggest opportunity for after school and summer learning funding since the creation of 21st Century Community Learning Centers. An extraordinary chance to do something, and something I believe that is permanent for our kids. So to reimagine learning to a place where we see a comprehensive, holistic approach to all of our children's needs. So of course the academic piece is important, but as we all know, our kids have been, many of them, isolated for over a year now, and those social emotional connection skills, many of them have experienced trauma. The opportunity to really address that and meet the kids where they are with all sorts of accelerated learning to make sure that they are in a place where they are ready to learn and ready to excel. And so in the bill, there's almost $30 billion, as I mentioned, that can be used for after school and summer learning. The state education set-asides have $8.45 billion. So it's a 5% carve out that can be used for any kind of learning loss, and summer learning and after school, comprehensive after school, are allowable uses. There's also a 1% set aside at the state level exclusively for after school enrichment, and note the word enrichment, not necessarily learning loss, and a 1% set aside at the state level for summer learning programs. At the local level, 20% of their funds have been set aside for learning loss, to address learning loss, and of those 20%, after school and summer learning are allowable uses of those funds. So what we really want to do is help you tap into both those state and local funding streams so that we can serve more kids. And we believe that if we can do some magic now and really showcase what our programs do for our kids, we can sustain this, and we can sustain this for a very long time. Next slide. Before we get to what this is really all about, I just wanted to thank all of you for what you've done. The after school field has been absolutely extraordinary during this pandemic, jumping through hoops to meet the needs of our kids and families, whether it's been virtual learning, hybrid learning, community learning hubs, meal delivery, lesson plan delivery, checking in. We have been blown away by what you have done. And the reason that these funds are in this bill are because our policymakers have seen what you've done and they've listened. And so now it's our chance to really turn from trying to do that Band-Aid of everything we can for our kids during the pandemic to how do we get them, back on track and come back stronger than ever. So with that, I thought it would be nice to actually hear from our youth themselves about what they need and what they want. So hit the video, please.
I am part of the robotics team. What I love about it is the fact that I get to work with a lot of people.
I've always had a passion for public speaking, for advocacy, and speech and debate gave me the access to do just that.
I feel like the most meaningful part of my after-school program would probably be the sense of community and family.
They're in a more safe environment where they can still be with friends and talk and have a fun time.
My after-school program has been very important. It gives us a hint of normal life before the pandemic.
Just that little time with those activities just really takes that stress away.
It just keeps us on our toes and keeps our minds working.
Even though it's 1 hour, it gives me hope that I'm not going to be alone for very much longer.
After-school programs gave me the ability and the opportunity to do the things that we've always been told that we're too small to do.
Tatar has been trying to help us achieve something that we wouldn't normally achieve.
They want to help you. They want you to be happy. It's a place where you can feel comfortable being who you are. That's something really great that I think a lot of people would benefit from.
After-school programs are vital and important, and we need funding to make sure that it can be sustainable for all.
So I just want to thank our tremendous youth and thank all of you, because this really is an extraordinary time where we actually have the resources to do something magical for our kids and to do something where we lay the infrastructure for it to continue and change learning as we know it. So with that, I'm going to turn this over to Eric Peterson.
Good afternoon, everybody. Hi, and thank you again. I add my thanks for joining us, but really also for all the work that you're doing during, it's a cliche, but through really trying, challenging times. Looking forward to talking through, I know there's been a lot of information that we've put out on our website and through partnership with previous webinars, and really hoping to dive a little bit deeper today and talk through with you all in some of the Q&A and discussion, some of the opportunities that are out there, and parse some of the nuances of the funding that passed as part of the American Rescue Plan Act and signed into law by President Biden on March 11th. So next slide. Let us really sort of try to figure out together what funds are available and where they all flow. So again, the American Rescue Plan passed in March. The elementary and secondary school emergency relief fund, or ESSER, that was included in the plan and the bill is actually known as ESSER 3. So in your conversations with local school or state school and education officials, it's referred to as the American Rescue Plan funds for education, or ESSER 3. ESSER 1 and ESSER 2 were part of both the CARES Act and then the CRRSA, the previous federal COVID relief bill that passed in December. So $122 billion were provided through the ESSER 3, or Elementary and Secondary School Emergency Relief Fund. The way that works is those funds, 2/3 of those began flowing to state departments of education in early April, late March. A third is being held back, but will also shortly flow to state departments of education as well. Once those funds get to each state, the states are holding on to 10% of those funds. So that's on the, as I'm looking at the slide, the right side of the slide, the 12.2 billion or 10% spread out among the states and territories, departments of education. And then 90% ends up going directly to the local education agencies, also known as school districts, at the local level. That's on your left side of the screen there. That 90% works out to $109 billion, and that furthermore gets split into two buckets when it gets down to the local education agency level. 20% of those funds, or 22 billion nationally, must be spent by the local education agency either directly or in partnership with community-based partners and others in the community to address learning loss for and recovery of lost instructional time for students. And specific interventions, evidence-based interventions, are called out in the law. We'll talk more in a second here, next slide, about what the law says. But among those interventions are, oh, sorry, not quite next slide yet. Among those interventions are, thank you, comprehensive after school, summer learning or summer enrichment, extended school day, extended school year. The other 80% of the funds, so that second box over from the far left, which is about 87 billion, actually can also be spent on at the discretion of the local school district on after school, summer learning, or community schools, and a whole host of other allowable uses, from technology to sanitation supplies and non-pharmaceutical interventions to address COVID, ventilation systems, a whole range, staffing, mental health supports for students. So a whole range of things, but a part of that list includes after school and summer as well. That left side of the slide is mostly what we're going to be talking about today on the webinar, but I do want to talk a little bit about the right side of the slide, which is the 10% which go to directly stay at the State Department of Education level. So states have some flexibility, but the law does weigh in on how they are able to spend that 10%, that 12.2 billion nationally. So you see there's three main buckets here. Those are three state level set-asides that are called out within the American Rescue Plan Act. And the first one is 5%, which of the funds that this state get, which works out to 6 billion for, again, learning loss recovery, after school, summer learning, summer enrichment, extended day, extended year, evidence-based practices addressing academic, social, and emotional needs of students, with a target focus on the students most impacted by the pandemic, low-income students, students of color. And we'll talk more about specifically the target groups in a little bit, but that 6 billion, there's some decisions to be made at the state level for the State Department of Education. In some states, in conjunction with the governor's office, with the state legislature, perhaps, will be a little different in each state in terms of how those funds meet that need. Will they send those funds also to school districts, or will they do a competition for those funds with community-based organizations? Will they do a funding through 21st Century Community Learning Centers? They have a lot of options and flexibility there. Similarly, the other two set-asides on here, which Jody referenced, the 1.2 billion for summer enrichment, and then the 1.2 billion for comprehensive after school. Both of those separate pots of funds also are at the state level and are ESSER 3 funds for state departments of education to determine the best way to use those to support both students' summer and after school needs. In terms of some examples on that, we actually saw just yesterday in Wisconsin, the governor announced $50 million for grants to nonprofit after school and summer learning providers, 25 million for this summer, 25 million for the school year for after school, the 21-22 school year. In Connecticut this morning, the governor, in conjunction with the statewide after school network and many others partners, announced $11 million for summer enrichment grants for community-based and other providers in the state of Connecticut. So if you're not in one of those states, don't fret. States have about a year to figure out how they're going to use these funds. While we hope they act much sooner than that, every state's going to be a little bit different in terms of the dynamics at play and what they think is the best use for these funds. My advice on those state level funds is really to make sure that you're on the mailing list, of the email list of your statewide after-school network, to reach out and communicate with them, and know that they are working closely with other partners in the state to work with their state departments of education, other decision makers at the state level around those funds. As I said earlier, we're primarily going to talk about the making the case to school districts around the local funds, that sort of 90% that goes to the local school district level, but did want to briefly flag the summer and after school state level set-asides and learning recovery set-asides, as that promises to be for many of you an opportunity to support your programs as well. Okay, next slide. We get lots of questions about what exactly the law says, so wanted to quickly visit that. So on the 20% and actually also on the 5% state level set aside, and the 20% local level set aside for what the bill calls learning loss recovery, you have a couple of key factors that you need to think about that the law calls out. First of all, addressing learning loss, which they define as a lost instructional time. In doing so, evidence-based interventions need to be implemented, and then they give the 4 examples of comprehensive after school, summer learning or summer enrichment, extended day or extended school year. As I mentioned earlier, these interventions need to respond to students' academic, social, and emotional needs. So simply doing academic tutoring, remedial summer school, won't necessarily fulfill the letter of the law. The law is clear again about the comprehensive nature of these programs that should be funded with these set-aside funds, and that address not just academic, although certainly that's part of it, but the social and emotional needs as well. And also, as I mentioned earlier, address the disproportionate impact of the coronavirus on students of color, students from low-income backgrounds, students with disabilities, English language learners, students who are migratory, students experiencing homelessness, students in correctional facilities, and students in foster care. That list comes from Title I, Part A of the Every Student Succeeds Act, and those are the list of students or priority populations within Title I that federal funds in part are designed to help support, in addition to the local and state education funds that support the entire student body. Next slide. So timing is the second question that we get a lot. When are these funds going to be available, and what's the time frame in terms of using the funds? So as I mentioned, the state departments of education are receiving 2/3 of their ESSER III fund allocations should have already been delivered to the state. The Secretary of Education announced in late March that those funds were going out. The way this works is 1/3 of those funds have not yet been distributed. The Department of Education actually today issued their plan template for states to fill out a plan, and working with local education agencies to collect stakeholder feedback. That's all of you and others to see what the best use for these funds will be. Work on a plan, and the states have to get that plan by early June to the Federal Department of Education, who will then approve those plans and free up the remaining 1/3 of the funds through ESSER III. With the 2/3 of funds that are in states now, the law states that to the extent practicable, so as possible, the state Department of Education should get those funds to school districts within 60 days of them getting them. So think if they got them in late March, think by June-ish. Although with the caveat there that as practicable within the state. Support can cover therefore at a minimum this summer, and we hope a lot of these funds, as we saw in Connecticut and Wisconsin this week, are able to address and support local community programs in this summer, but also next summer and summer of 2023. And then the current school year finishing up, but next school year and the school year after 2021-22 and 22-23. The law says the funds need to be obligated by September 30th, 2023. There is something called a tidings waiver that allows state departments of education to extend that by a year to 2024. So you may come across that in some states or in conversations with some school districts. And the last thing I want to say here on the timing piece is the Congressional Budget Office has estimated that some of these funds will actually get spent after 2023 all the way up until 2028 as a result of the way funding, federal funding works, and braiding and blending it with other funding sources, including the prior two COVID relief bills. So it's possible that we'll see some of these funds used just as we did back in 2009 with the ARA funds, the relief funds following the recession in 2008, 2009. Some of those funds really were able to be stretched by school districts for several years after the obligated by date. While that gets a little bit gray in terms of the times, the key takeaway really is that conversations are happening now and if in your community. If they're not, they're starting very soon. And now is the time to reach out and talk through what the situation looks like and what the conversation is around the uses for the funds at your local level with your school district. Next slide, please. So as we mentioned, we have 3 levels of decision makers here on these funds. At the national level, the U.S. Department of Education is providing direction, both to school districts and states, on how to use these funds. At the local level, the Department of Education's COVID-19 Handbook Volume 2, Roadmap to Reopening Schools Safely and Meeting All Students' Needs, was published about 10 days ago now, and we'll drop that link in the chat. That includes guidance for school districts on how to spend their American Rescue Plan, including the 20% learning recovery set aside. It has a lengthy section in there on after school and on the evidence base for that with quite a few sites. It talks about the summer enrichment, summer learning piece, and talks about the need to partner with community-based organizations if you're a school district. It does have several examples like Our Bridge in North Carolina and other after-school programs that have been able to work with schools in partnership to support the needs of students and families. At the state level, we expect a frequently asked question document with guidance soon from the Department of Ed. And then, as I mentioned just today, there is the state template plan, which also has lots of direction at the state level, including at the local level as well, with ideas on how to ensure these funds meet the needs of young people, community partners, and other stakeholders being consulted on the way that the funds should be spent. At the state level, as we mentioned earlier, the SEA, state education agencies, will focus on that 5% state set aside for learning recovery, as well as the 1% for after school, 1% for summer. But the state education agencies also are expected, and we saw this in the last 2 COVID bills, to provide some guidance to local school districts on how to use their 20% set aside for learning recovery and the other funds as well. We also expect states to ask local school districts for a plan themselves on how they got feedback from the community, how they worked with stakeholders in terms of what their plan is for spending the funds. And again, reiterate from before, highly encourage you to check your state after school network website and make sure you're on their list for news on how your state education agency is planning to spend those state level set asides. At the local level, that's again where we're going to focus some of the tools and resources out there. This is really about selling your program, making the case to local school districts. If you are a community-based program, a faith-based provider, or others, it is really about making the case to district leaders, superintendents, school boards, parent PTAs and parent groups, principals, teachers, all the folks in the school district that are able to have a say in how the plans are used at the local level. And having a needs assessment, asking if the school district, if they have asked what students and parents in the community need in terms of how the funds should be spent, is always a good place to start. And it's encouraging to see the Department of Ed in their state template plan, as well as in the handbook, have referenced that as well. Next slide, please. So as I mentioned, the COVID-19 Handbook Volume 2 wanted to flag not all the sections in here, but in particular the uses that the American Rescue Plan can be used for, and call out a couple. This isn't all the ones in the handbook, but there's a couple that jumped out at us. If you look at the providing integrated student supports, being able to be used for full service community schools, providing after school or other out of school time programs that address social, emotional, academic needs, working with partners, community-based organizations to partner on summer learning and summer enrichment. So a lot of avenues here, again, to be able to encourage you all to, if you haven't already, to look at that PDF online in terms of having those conversations and making the case to school districts. Next slide. So what are the next steps in terms of accessing these funds? So if we go to the next slide, as we mentioned, reaching out to your local education agencies and leaders. And these are some of the key folks, but if you are already as a community-based organization, either partnering on a 21st century grant with your school district or working with them in some other capacity for summer or after school, going obviously to the contacts that you have now and being able to work through those relationships and just ask the questions about, are they looking at the ESSER 3 plans yet, the American Rescue Plan money? Do they have thoughts on asking students and young people and families how those funds should be spent? What are their goals in terms of learning recovery for students this summer and into next school year? And how can you be of assistance as a community-based provider? Next question, or next slide rather. And then offering yourself as a resource, asking for support around expanding the number of students that they're able to serve, being able to provide that sort of second tier of educators that can help address the needs of students, being able to restart perhaps programs that were closed as a result of COVID-19, and supplementing, complementing their strategies around reconnecting and re-engaging young people, whether that's older youth who maybe in a virtual schooling setting have tuned out and need to be re-engaged and reconnected with school and their own education and rekindling those passions for learning, or whether it has been at the younger age level, students who maybe were in pre-K last year and didn't make it into kindergarten or were expected to join as kindergartners but didn't. And how can those families and their children be again reconnected and re-engaged with their peers and help develop those relationships and passions for learning. Next slide. We have a number of, and we'll jump into these now, a number of resources and tools that really do help make the case. All of you are experts in what the impact and value of after school and summer learning programs are, or you wouldn't be on here today. And you know the benefits from a school district perspective in partnering with community-based providers, again, whether they're faith-based providers, parks and recs, libraries, or the whole host and range of the very broad and diverse after school and summer learning out of school time field. So being able to offer more time for staff and students to engage in learning activities, the social, emotional, interpersonal, and mental health connections, the going beyond to provide meals, mental health supports, physical activity that so many students were unable to do this year in virtual classrooms. And really emphasizing the family engagement piece here as well. We know, and the research is clear, that after school programs have strong ties in terms of parent and family engagement, and being able to leverage that now more than ever. And just adding to the spaces that are out there, whether you're in a library, parks, museums, faith-based organizations. Part of the challenge with COVID is social distancing and spacing out and having cohorts of students working with in a smaller ratio with staff. And after school programs, community-based programs often provide not just additional experts in terms of youth workers and staff, but also access to additional spaces. Next slide, please. School districts benefit in a wide variety of ways from partnering with community-based organizations, and it's your job really to make them aware of that and to make the case. Again, extending the time, the spaces, the resources, and that specialized support, making learning come alive, re-engaging young people, again, who have maybe tuned out a little bit over the past year. Next slide. The evidence base is key, as we mentioned earlier, both in the handbook and in the law itself. Evidence-based practices and programs are a key part of this, at both the state level funds as well as the local school district funds. The good news is there is a host of evidence and research out over the last 5 to 10 years, really making the case for after school and summer learning programs. around increasing students who are in programs are more likely to attend school, on in-classroom behavior, on homework and grade gains, on improving work habits, on the social emotional side and strong interpersonal relationship skills with adults and peers, and on increased graduation rates. The Wallace Foundation, as well as Brand, and many others have well documented the practices, the best successful practices for after school and summer learning programs. And the good news is there is a strong evidence base for after school programs. Many of you as programs have your own data and research that can complement and supplement what is in the national research. But the good news is, again, there's a lot of research out there that you can tie your program back into to help make the case that, in fact, these are evidence-based programs with a really extensive research basis in terms of their effectiveness in re-engaging students on the social emotional academic side. Next slide, please. Some of the tools, so a handy dandy website, 3to6.co/rescue that are out there available for you. I'm going to walk through some of those really quickly and then hand it over to Tiffany. So the next slide, I believe, has some of the screenshots of the fact sheets. So both for after school and for summer, really at the national level, being able to cite some of that research, some quick infographics, and these can be used for school decision makers at PTA meetings, to school district officials. Add your own information, obviously, to these materials as well, showing the impact of your program and any data on what you have in terms of impacts and reach. Next slide. In addition to the fact sheets, again, the evidence-based and research. So a couple of different screenshots here of the Wallace Foundation's research on summer and after school and meeting the evidence-based requirements both in the law and the handbook. One pagers as well as more in-depth materials that make it very clear that after school and summer learning programs in local school districts, communities as partners can really help them meet that evidence-based requirement. Next slide. Another resource that we wanted to flag for folks is a website that we're working on in partnership with a number of other out-of-school time education, youth development, after school and summer learning associations, programs, and providers. And this is the helpkidsrecover.org website. It's really designed for the audience of school decision makers. And if you're talking to school officials and they want to learn more about how after school and summer learning are evidence-based and what the strategies, evidence-based strategies and practices are, or even what the law says and requires, or perhaps they're looking to know exactly what funds are available to support after school and summer at the state and local level. This is kind of a one-stop shop, again, aimed at the local education decision maker and audience, although it also works for parents, state legislators, state level folks, and can be useful for program providers as well, again, for a lot of that information. But you can, in those conversations, if they want to learn more, feel free to direct them to the site. It has state and local examples and contact info for statewide after-school networks as well on this. And so again, it's really another resource to really make the case where community partners can leverage what they're already doing as a school district and provide additional support to help meet the needs of their students and families. And at this point, I know you're anxious to hear what this looks like in the real world. So I'm going to turn it over to our esteemed after school ambassador from Georgia and also CEO of Girls Inc. of Greater Atlanta, Tiffany Colley-Bailey, who's going to talk a little bit about her firsthand experiences of how programs can partner with school districts, access these funds potentially, and provide programs to students. So Tiffany.
Well, hello, thanks, Eric. I appreciate it. And good morning to some and good afternoon to others. It is a pleasure to join you today and to be able to share just a little bit of Girls Inc. of Greater Atlanta's our thriving story through the pandemic and beyond. So a little bit about Girls Inc. of Greater Atlanta. We are a part of the National Organization of Girls Inc., where there are 78 affiliates across the nation, the US and Canada. And so at Girls Inc. of Greater Atlanta, our mission is to inspire all girls to be strong, smart, and bold. And we do that through what is not just our mission, but it really boils down to our curriculum. So when we talk about being strong, it really is supporting our girls with being strong physically, mentally, and emotionally through life skills. When we talk about being smart, that talks about our STEM, science, technology, engineering, and math enrichment programs that we do with our girls. And then it also talks about reading literacy. And then, of course, when we talk about being bold, bold is everything that it sounds like. It is I am, I can, I will. About being a great community advocate and steward within your community. It is about college and career readiness, social and economical empowerment for our girls. And so, when we talk about who we serve as girls, our girls are in grades K through 12. A little demographics about specifically Girls Inc. of Greater Atlanta. About 78% of our girls are coming from under-resourced and underserved communities, and about 80% of our girls are girls of color. Now, the pandemic. We were all impacted as youth development organizations and community-based organizations with the pandemic, and Girls Inc. of Greater Atlanta wasn't any different. We had to close our doors in March, and we had to quickly figure out how to pivot our programs. And so when we say pivot our programs, we were in 15 to 17 schools across the greater Metro Atlanta metropolitan area, whether that was school-based programs during the day or that was after-school programs, as well as running some weekend programs and running programs at our center. And so all of that had to pivot. And so like many others, we pivoted into virtual programs, and we ran virtual programs straight from about March to June. And then in June, we added hybrid. So we started a hybrid summer program, and the hybrid summer program included some virtual as well as some limited in-person, nicely social distance. But it really was in the summer where we began to have conversations about what is fall going to look like. And it was a little scary. It was working with organizations such as our state after-school network, Georgia, GSAN, that we participated in webinars and conversations. And one particular conversation was I did a webinar that not just included youth development organizations, but it included local school districts. And what I learned and what I walked away with from that webinar is that it takes a village. It absolutely takes a village. And so from there, I reached out to my local school district and said, how are you guys managing the fall? And what does it look like? And how can we help support? And so by the fall, we had come up with a program that allowed us to run a full in-person program in our building for those parents, for girls who were going back to school virtually, but their parents had to go to work. So they needed a safe space for their girls to come and learn and to navigate their academic virtual day. And so we created what we tagged as Girls Inc. University. It was an amazing program. And I'll tell you that our school districts not only supported us, they and they said, well, if you run out of space in your center, we'll provide you with additional space in our facilities, or we will also be willing to connect you with community organizations like churches who were willing to host us there. And they said, and for those offsite facilities, we'll cover the janitorial for it. Don't worry about it. If you need a Wi-Fi truck at that center or at your center, we'll give you the Wi-Fi truck and stick it in the parking lot. Oh, don't forget about lunches. We'll provide lunches for the students. Oh, got to get that virtual platform? Here you go. So our schools really became an amazing partner that has worked with us until today, right? Providing those resources to us that, it would have been very hard for us to navigate on our own. And so, as we look at our current programming, as we're looking forward to the summer, like many of you, we're opening up for a summer program. And generally in our summer program, we host about 150 girls. And so this year, we decided that we still wanted to host the same number of girls, but we really needed to do it in a social distance fashion. So we've added multiple sites to our program. So we'll have our K through 5 program at our center, and then our middle school and high school programs will be located offsite, but we'll provide transportation from our center to the other programs. And so for me, my focus is not only on getting summer going, but I'm really focused on that next school year and what's to come and the funding. What we learned through the pandemic, because we were providing and maintaining the program with our girls, are that the enhanced needs of our girls in terms of wellness and mental health, the challenges that they were facing. But, before we talk about the enhanced need, We have to talk about before that the girls that we were serving already were girls who were coming from socio and economic challenges in their communities. Our girls were already, more than 50% of them were already reading below grade level, had low self-esteem, were experiencing some depression. And so when you look at what the pandemic did, for our girls, it just exacerbated their challenges. It magnified the trauma that they had already been engaging in some way before the pandemic. And so during the pandemic, we created a wellness program, and our wellness program really focuses on the 12 dimensions of wellness. That is mental health. We want to give our girls the words to express what they feel. I feel anxious, I feel stressed, and then to help them gain and develop the positive coping skills to deal with that. We recognize the learning loss, but we, more importantly, I think, kind of understand that before we can, accurately and efficiently address the learning loss, we have to address the trauma. We have to address the social and emotional needs of our girls, and not just our girls, but our youth, so that we can support them when it comes to really engaging and regaining the learning that they lost. And so as I am having conversations with school districts, and so where did I start? I went right back to those 15 to 17 schools that we were in that roughly represented about 4 to 5 different school districts. And I started to talk to them, and I'm having these conversations on a weekly basis. And I'm having conversations with the lead teacher who initially brought us into the program, who brought us into the school. I'm having the conversation with the counselor who has supported the Girls Inc. program in their school, with the assistant principal who's the biggest cheerleader for us. And we're talking about our experiences during the pandemic, the programming that we developed. And we developed this wellness program with a licensed therapist who supported us along the way and worked with our girls and worked with us to develop a really research-based program that supports the mental health needs of our girls. I'm having the conversation with whoever will listen, even some of my community influencers, my school board members, my PTA members, because you can never tell your story enough. The story of what you have done through the pandemic to support the youth, the programs that you have developed, that you have enhanced, and how you, coming up in the fall and the summers to come, can bring that same quality programming to more students to be able to create a larger impact within the school district. It goes back to being a village, right? It takes all of us coming together to be able to meet the needs of our kids. So if I could give you advice on this, I would tell you that if you're trying to figure out, well, I don't know the superintendent, you don't have to. You are amazing and have created relationships, and start with the relationships that you have, whether it's that lead teacher, the assistant principal, whether it's the PTA president or secretary. Tell your story and allow them to connect you to the next level within their district. You can never tell your story enough. The next thing I would tell you to do is to make sure that you become a part of your state after school network. We have an amazing network here in Georgia, GSAN, and they do a dynamic job in keeping us informed as youth development professionals. They are uniquely positioned and having conversations on our behalf that are advocating for what we do and how we do it, and are really having those conversations with those departments of education and those leaders and those funders. And so if you are not a part of your state area after school network provider, go join them now. Stay tuned in, join their email list, but they are crucial to how we move forward in making sure that we're connected with the funding. It takes a village with this. I go back to that. It takes a village. So here it is. If you have a village, it's time to rally the troops, right? This is the time to all hands on deck and get it going. If you don't have a village, it's time to build it. At Girls Inc. Greater Atlanta, mission is simple: inspire all girls to be strong, smart, and bold. And I believe that is true for all youth development professionals and what we do. That's what we do, but we do it even better, and we do it more effectively and more efficiently when we have the village. Every youth deserves a village around them that cares and wants to provide them with all the resources that are possible. So let's go Village.
Awesome. Thanks so much, Tiffany. I love it and totally agree. All right, we have just about 15 minutes for some questions. I know there's lots of questions for Tiffany, which is awesome. I'd love to hear more about you reaching out to and advice for folks reaching out to school districts. Let's take a look at our questions here, and we'll jump into these. So there was one, and you just talked about this at the end, but maybe expanding on this a little bit more. The question was, how do I reach out to my local school district to offer our out-of-school time services? We would love to partner with local schools.
So I'll tell you, we really started with having conversations with, if you don't have any relationships, we cold called the school. And what we found out to be sometimes our best advocate within the schools were our counselors. Our counselors really did understand, especially the social emotional needs of our youth. And so through many times the counselors were able to get us connected into the school. And then from a counselor, a lot of times we moved up to the assistant principal and the principal. So whether it starts there or there are other opportunities where we were able to connect. They had strong PTAs in the school. And so we were able to start with the PTA, and the PTA brought us into the school. Start anywhere that you can. Many times going on to, if we didn't have a relationship with that particular school district, we would literally go on the website, figure out where we wanted to be and find someone in the district's website or in that looking at the school directory that we would cold call. Also working with our parents, right? Some of our parents who are already a part of our center-based programs, we would talk to them about, what's going on in the school and can you make an introduction on our behalf to the teacher? And then we worked our way up. Start anywhere that you can, right? Whether it's the teacher, whether it is the counselor or the assistant principal or the PTA, but just start. That's the most important piece to it.
Awesome. Thanks so much. And thank you for that question, folks in the chat. Another question that we had was, I'm looking for funding to pay for staff. I'm interested in the AmeriCorps Vista program. Can you give me details or anything you have to share with me? So two answers from me on that. One, first of all, on the AmeriCorps Vista piece. So as you may know, in addition to the education funds, there's a number of other funding in the American Rescue Plan that can be used to support after school and summer programs. There was $1 billion to the Corporation for National Community Service for AmeriCorps and AmeriCorps Vista. And you're in luck. We have a webinar coming up in this series that's going to dive deeper specifically into that with several partners and programs as well. But we can follow up with you with additional information on that. The Corporation for National Community Service is a little, I won't say behind, but they're still working on rolling out some of that information on the American Rescue Plan opportunities. But also wanted to answer the question on terms of the funding to pay for staff. So both the law itself, the American Rescue Plan Act, and the Elementary and Secondary School Emergency Relief, or ESSER 3, fund the language within the law, as well as in the Department of Ed's handbook, are all really clear that these funds can be used to pay staff, whether it's school district staff or community-based organization staff, if the funds are shared at the local level or if it comes from the state level set-asides for community-based organizations, that staffing is either rehiring previous staff or hiring new staff is all not only allowable but encouraged as a result of the use of these funds. I don't know if anyone else wants to chime in on that question, or we can jump to another one. There was one more here from Di Kennedy through the Zoom. What if we already have after school and summer programs? Can this funding replace our current funding? Could you share the specific states that have the set aside summer fund competitions already posted? So two different questions there. In terms of the first one, if you already have programs, so the funding that's available really is meant to expand on. So if there's an existing program already that you currently have funding for, what this funding can do, and it really would depend on your partnering with your local school district, and or if you're thinking about the state funds, this would be able, we hope for programs to be able to expand, right, to provide services and programs to more kids, expand into additional schools or parts of the community, being able to, if you're currently offering an after-school program but don't have the funds for a summer program, that maybe this could allow you to do year-round programming and offer summer programming to the same students you serve during the school year. So it's really meant to expand, supplement, and complement the work that's currently being done. In terms of the specific states that have already announced funding at the state level, and thank you to Cassie in the chat who has chimed in on from Vermont. So I'll add that to the list, but we mentioned Wisconsin and Connecticut and now Vermont as well. Just in the last 2 days, Connecticut today and Vermont and Wisconsin yesterday announced opportunities for community-based organizations either for summer or summer in the case of Vermont and Connecticut, and in Wisconsin, funds for after school and summer. So again, we're hoping to see more of those. And while they're not quite up there yet, look soon. I'd say give us till tomorrow. That we'll be posting on that 3to6.co/rescue, or our American Rescue Plan website, linked off the main page from our After School Alliance website. We'll be linking information to how to, depending on what state you're in, how to access those funds.
If I could just chime in too on one thing, for those of you that already have funding to run programs, obviously expansion and reaching more kids is key, but we also know that there's a lot of costs that are unanticipated because of the pandemic. And it's really unclear, depending on where you live, what kind of additional precautions and safety measures you're going to need to have to run a person in program. So those are, you may need to hire more staff. You may need to expand into additional locations. And those kinds of expenses, you could use the AARP dollars, because in effect, it's allowing you to expand services that you couldn't otherwise do. So the key is that you want to be supplementing, not supplanting what you would have been doing, but there's a lot of good reasons that you would need to be supplementing. And one thing I did want to answer, I saw in the chat room, is you do not need to currently be receiving federal funding to apply for the American Rescue Plan funds.
Great, thank you, Jody. Want to flag another question. There was a couple sort of on this theme of some schools have said that they're doing their own sort of in-house programming, and how do we address that? And Tiffany, you may want to chime in on this as well, but I'll start us off by saying, you know, many programs have that, but we also know that, and this is clear from surveys that we've done of the field of programs as well as parents, America After 3 p.m. that came out, the data set that came out last December, but really from this spring as well, that there's tremendous need out there among students coming out of the pandemic, going into summer and next school year, and that even though a district may have a current existing program, that doesn't necessarily mean that will meet the need. So being, again, able to complement or supplement the programs that are out there, and potentially partner directly with that program. What can you bring to the table that can make that program even more responsive to the needs of students, an even stronger program? So I think there's a lot of still opportunity to have that conversation with the school and with school districts. Tiffany, anything you might want to add to that?
I would completely agree. There are a couple of our schools that, you know, we came in during the day generally for that particular school, but they had an after school program. And so we're now having conversation. How do we bring specific aspects of our program, not our whole program, but right now more intentionally our wellness program, because that is something that school does not have the capacity to do. So we're learning how to take our program and really bring bites of it to meet the needs of the school. So it's not an all or nothing. You have to take the whole program, but you can take what you need from our program, and we're more than happy to pair it with what you're doing to strengthen the whole program strictly the program as a whole. So if you think of it from that perspective, is what are you strong in? And then you can also use your data points. Girls Inc. of Greater Atlanta has been around for 45 years. And so we are uniquely positioned to work with girls in a lot of different areas. And so I can bring all of my data points, my research about what we do and how we do it. And I can share that with the school district to reinforce, why we're here and why it's really a great idea to utilize some of our programming.
Thanks so much for that, Tiffany. And really thank everybody for all these really awesome questions. I apologize that we didn't get to all of them. I'm going to try to do one more, and then I'm going to hand it back to Jody Anna, who's going to close us out, cognizant of the fact that we only have a couple minutes left here. We will be capturing all these questions, and we follow up with the recording, do an FAQ with the questions we did not get to. One quick question, because I know we got a lot of them, was around nonprofit and for-profits being able to access this. Really, again, that's a question that's going to be different for each state and locality. There's nothing in the law that prohibits for-profit community after-school programs or summer programs from accessing these funds. That's going to be for the state level funds, a state level education decision. And at the local level, there's lots of local school districts that partner a lot with for-profit organizations in addition to nonprofits in their community. So again, that's going to be a local school district decision as well. But I know off the top of my head of several examples where both for-profits and nonprofits, obviously with Tiffany here, who are partnering extensively with their school districts. So certainly not a closed door there, but an opportunity. I'm going to throw it over to Jody now in our last couple of minutes to close us out. And thank you all once again for spending some time with us this afternoon.
So again, thank you all. So many questions. I wanted to encourage all of you to continue signing up for all of our resources and websites, because as we get more information state by state on some of those questions, we'll be sharing it with you. Please remember what Tiffany said. Whole programs can go after this, but also pieces of your programs can be partners. And the key is to figure out who contains the money, whether it's your local education agency or your state education agency, and get them to make sure we have comprehensive programs for our kids. And I also just want to give a shout out to the 50 state networks as resources for each of you. So if you don't know your 50 state network, you can find it on our webpage and make sure you're on their mailing lists as well. It's imperative. We have this incredible opportunity that we thank our members of Congress for giving it to us. So we made it easy for you. If you just go to 3to6.co/Congress. You can thank your members, let them know. It's a great chance to let them know what you're doing during COVID, during this pandemic, whether it's in person, virtual, or both. I think it's great. They want to know what's happening back home. Also, ask them to continue to support 21st Century. As we've heard in a lot of the chats, sometimes it's really hard to get the school districts to give money to programs outside their school walls. So we need to make sure that they know this is important, and that these set-asides, things like funding exclusively for after school, really do make it easier for us to reach kids and reach families. And save the date for all of our upcoming webinars, where we're going to try and continue to address all of these questions and share some of the best practices and successes from the field with all of you. And last but not least, thank you, because you have really been a lifeline for all of our children, our youth, our families, and our communities throughout this past year plus. And I think we're going to be more than a lifeline. We're going to be a foundation for the future in the year to come.